everyone, my name's Arjun, and today I'm going to be showing you guys 12 awesome tactics from real games. So with that out of the way, let's get started. So this first game was played between Stefan Levitsky and Frank James Marshall. Frank Marshall was one of the world's first grandmasters in the early 1900s, and he was playing black here. This game started off with d4, e6, e4, d5, so a transposition into the French defense. It continued like this. So here, black will likely get an isolated queen pawn, but in exchange, he might get a lot of activity. Castles, bishop e7, bishop g5, castles. It's about equal here. Here, white played d takes c5, and instead of recapturing, black chose to play bishop e6. He's going to recapture next. White played knight d4, black took on c5, white took on e6, and black took back. And here, there are several important imbalances in the position. So you'll notice that white has the two bishops, which is generally an advantage in open positions like these. Black, however, has this open f-file, which could end up being useful later, and he has these two hanging pawns. That's what it's called when you have two pawns, which are not protected on either side by any others. So hanging pawns can either be a weakness or a strength, and that just depends on how black plays with them later in the game. Here, white played the move bishop g4, which is not a very good move. And that's because, obviously, it attacks e6, but once black protects e6, like he did in the game with the move queen d6, the bishop is sort of misplaced there. So in the game, white played bishop h3 because he doesn't want black's knight to take it, and black brought his rook a to e8, protecting this pawn, and now his rooks are on two pretty good files. Next, white played queen d2, getting his queen out, and black played bishop b4. White chose to take on f6, rook takes, and he played his rook to d1 now. Now black played queen c5, getting out of this line with the queen and the rook. And white played queen e2. And at first, this may look like it just loses a pawn, but white has a trick here. So after it takes, see if you can find it. White can play rook takes d5. And the idea is that if black takes, then he'll take this rook. And in this specific situation, black will actually get mated in two right after this sequence of moves. So, of course, Marshall didn't fall for that mating trick. After rook takes d5, he didn't take back. He played knight to g4, attacking the queen. Now, if white plays a move like queen e4, the game is about equal. But he played a very natural-looking move that completely loses, and that's queen to h5. This move obviously attacks the black rook, so he should still not take here. But what black does here is he plays rook e to f8, and this just doubles the rooks on the file. And now he has a pretty important threat, which is rook takes f2. And the idea is that if rook takes f2 after rook takes back, then queen to e1. And if you calculate that, you'll see that white's king is here and his rook is here, but black has this one rook on the f-file. So after white moves his rook back to f1, black can take with the queen with checkmate. So obviously white cannot allow that to happen. He plays rook e5. Now black spots another tactic, and that's the move rook to h6. And the idea behind this tactic is after most of white's moves, white played queen g5, black has another tactic in this position. Can you find it? The move is rook takes h3. And the idea behind this move is that if you take back, knight f3 is a family fork. It forks the queen, rook, and king. So black would be completely winning after this. White did not take back, however, and instead he tried the move rook to c5. And here, black has a stunning move which wins the game. And there are many winning moves, but black played the coolest and also the best one. So I'll give you a moment to try and look. The move is queen to g3. And the reason this wins is because white doesn't have any satisfactory response. And this move just looks really cool aesthetically because black is putting the queen where it can be taken by three different pieces, but they all lose. So white has three responses, really. If he moves the queen somewhere, then he's likely going to get mated after some of these moves like this. So if white plays h takes g3, then knight e2 is checkmate, so he can't allow that to happen. If he plays f takes g3, then black will play knight e2. Only legal move for white is king h1. And rook takes f1 wins the game with mate. So white actually resigned here, but if he played the move queen takes g3, which is the only move that survives, pretty much, black will play knight e2 again. And white only has one legal move, after which black will play knight takes g3. And white is going to lose a lot of material here because he obviously cannot take with the h-pawn because it's pinned. If he takes with the f-pawn, then rook takes f1 as mate. And the only other option is to play king to g1. And obviously he loses this rook now, and after he takes back on h3, knight to d2, and black is up a piece and is completely winning. On to the second tactic. This one is very similar to the first tactic, and it was played between Nicolas Rossolimo, who invented the Rossolimo variation of the Sicilian, against Paul Reissmann. The game started with e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, bishop c5, so the Italian game. Play continued like this. And in this position, it may look as though white has a big center, so he should be better. But black plays a good move here. Sorry, not knight to d5. He plays pawn d5, and this counters in the center, and it's about equal here. So what white does is he takes. And now white maybe has slightly better development, but he also has this isolated d-pawn. So white plays queen to b3, and black plays knight c to e7, protecting the knight, and intending to play c6 in the future with the pawn. White castles, and black plays c6, as I mentioned, and white plays rook fe1, just getting the rook onto a good open file and lined up against the king. So black castles as well, and white plays a4. He wants to stop this idea of playing b5. So black plays b6 instead. He wants to fianchetto the bishop. White plays knight e5, getting onto an active square. And a possible idea is that he can take on c6, black takes back, and take here. This is a possible idea for the future. But black just plays bishop b7, and now white plays a5. And one possible idea after this move is he wants to play a6, and then it'll force the bishop to retreat, probably to c8. So black plays b takes a5 here, and this is not a very, he does not play b takes a5. That is a very bad move. Then he loses the bishop like this. So of course he shouldn't let that happen. Instead he plays rook to c8, which allows this move knight e4. And white's just trying to be more aggressive here and attack on the king side in the future. So black plays queen c7, white plays a6, bishop a8, queen h3. So he's just moving all of his pieces over to the king side, trying to attack on that wing. Black plays knight f4, attacking the queen, and after queen g4, knight e to d5. So now these two knights are sort of connected like this, which can be good or it can be bad. So white plays rook a3 here, which may look like a strange move at first, but the idea is that the rook wants to go along the third rank, so that's called a rook lift, and it's an important motif. Black plays knight e6, bringing his knight back, and white plays this tactical sequence. Bishop takes d5, c takes d5, knight f6. And after king h8, the only legal move, white plays a really nice move here, which is very reminiscent of the first position. Can you find it? The move is queen to g6. And there are many, this is reminiscent of the first position because in the previous one, black played queen to g3. This is essentially the same except it's mirrored. So black has two recaptures. He has h takes g6, which of course will fail to rook h3 mate. And he has f takes g6, but this also gets mated because after knight takes g6, h takes g6 only move, rook h3 is still mate. So of course he loses after these options. And in the game, what black did is he played queen to c2. And the concept is, of course, if white takes, that would not be a good move because he would just take back. But white found another pretty cool move here. See if you can find it. That move is rook to h3. And he actually has mate in 7 here, but instead of allowing that, black just resigned. And just some possible variations are if you take with the f-pawn, then white will take on h7 mate. And if you take with the queen, it's not much better, because because after knight takes, only legal move, checkmate. And of course, if you play any alternative, white's definitely going to mate you because he's got all of these pieces aimed on the king side. On to the third puzzle. This third game was played between Bobby Fischer and Samuel Reshevsky. And both of these players were very good at one point in time, but Fischer actually managed to obtain a winning position in less than 15 moves, which is very rare at the Grandmaster level. The game started out with a Sicilian defense, e4, c5, and Fischer continued with knight f3, knight c6, d4, open Sicilian. All pretty standard so far. And here Black played the first mistake of the game. He played the move knight a5, which is a very natural move. Perhaps he saw Fischer's reply, but he didn't see what Fischer would do after that. So the idea is obviously he wants to take on b3. So instead of protecting this bishop, Fischer played the move e5. And he's attacking this knight. And if Black takes on b3, that would not be very good for him because after e takes f6, obviously if you take back, then white takes and he'll be up a piece. So you have to take on a1 pretty much. And after takes, king takes, this knight is going to lose, is going to fall, and once white takes it at now or later, then he'll have two pieces for a rook, which is generally a favorable advantage. But instead of losing some material, Reshevsky played the move knight e8. And white only has one winning move here. Can you find it? If white plays any other natural move, then he isn't going to be winning. But I'm going to show the move. That move is bishop takes f7. And now Black only has 3 legal moves. But of course, what if he takes back? The idea here is, well, this is another tactic, so see if you can find it. The idea is he's going to play knight e6, and this traps the queen. If you take, then obviously queen takes d8, and white's up a queen. And the knight and bishop work perfectly together because they cover the queen's only escape squares, so the queen cannot escape. Therefore, this move wins the queen. Instead, if Black tries taking with the king, as he did in the actual game, knight e6 is played again, and obviously you cannot take because of queen takes d8. These two squares are still covered by the knight and bishop. And if you take with the king, there's a pretty nice mating sequence here. And it goes like this. Queen to d5 check, king f5, g4. This sacrifices a pawn with check, but also opens up lines for the rook. So the rook can join the battle. Now, if he plays king h4, this is the best resistance, basically. And what white should do is he should just play something like queen e4. Now, you can play king h3, but after that, after queen g2, king h4, queen g4, it'll be mate. And there are similar mates in many other variations. So if we go back to what actually happened in the game, from this position, what Reshevsky did is he just took with the pawn, and he decided to be down a queen, but I won't go through the rest of the game, and Fischer won pretty easily. This fourth game was taken from a rapid game between Viktor Korchnoi, former World Championship challenger, and Ilya Smirin. So this started out Korchnoi playing white with d4, knight f6, c4, g6, so a King's Indian, knight c3, bishop g7, e4, d6, bishop g5, h6, bishop e3, knight g4, bishop c1. So Black is just attacking white's bishop over and over again. And here he plays e5, d5, and f5. So this is a typical King's Indian breakthrough since Black is trying to attack on the king side in this line. Takes, h3, knight f6, knight goes to e2, and f4. So Black wants to gain space on the king side. White plays queen d3, getting his queen out, and castles. And already here, it looks as though Black's position is probably a bit favorable because he has more space, and he's already castled with slightly better development. White plays g3. He's trying to make a dent in Black's pawn structure, and Black plays e4. Knight takes, knight takes, knight takes, queen takes. So neither side is playing perfectly here. There have been some inaccuracies, but this was a rapid game. So, yeah. Black plays bishop f5 here, And the position is about equal after this move. White is down, or sorry, no, not white. Black is down a pawn, but black has good development and he has more space. At least on the king side, he has more active pieces, that is. White plays queen f3. He does not want this extra pawn. Black plays knight a6, getting his knight developed. It might go to b4 or perhaps c5 after this. White plays bishop g2, getting his bishop out, preparing for castling. Knight c5 is played, threatening to go knight d3. And here white chooses to play g takes f4, which looks a bit surprising at first, especially considering after knight d3, king f1, white has lost his right to castle. And in this position, I would definitely take black here, because he just has more space, more active pieces, and a safer king. But the position is actually only slightly better for black. He plays rook e8 now, getting his rook onto this good file. White plays queen h5, attacking the bishop, and he plays queen f6, protecting it. Now white plays bishop f3, and the idea is he wants to go king g2 and bring his rook out. So it's sort of like he was castling by hand. Now knight takes b2 is played, and after takes, black has won back one of his pawns. And white plays the move king g2 here, protecting his rook like this. Now black plays bishop d3, attacking this knight. So the move rook a to e1 is played. And the knight's protected 3 times. And although black's position is about equal here, I would probably take black, just because he's only down 1 pawn and white has these lots of weaknesses all around the board. However, black's next move is a blunder. He played the move queen b4, attacking this rook. Can you see why? I'll give you a moment to find out. Alright, the move for white is to play knight c1, and here black actually just resigned. So the reason this is winning is because he's obviously attacking black's bishop, and a discovered attack on this rook. So if black moves his bishop somewhere, rook takes, wins a rook. Then obviously the only other alternative really is just to take on e1, and here white can play knight takes d3, and this is a fork. So normally what black would do is he would take on h1, but here of course he'll lose his queen after that. And if he moves the queen somewhere, then after a move like knight or rook takes e1, white is completely winning. So I think that this tactic is especially hard to find just because it's a backwards knight move and we don't tend to look for those as much. The 5th game was played between Edward Lasker and George Allen Thomas. Edward Lasker being related to Emanuel Lasker, former world champion. The game started with d4, e6, knight f3, f5, so the Dutch defense. Knight c3, knight f6, bishop g5, bishop e7, takes, e4, takes. So black does have the bishop pair, but white has a better development and more center. Black plays b6, white plays knight e5, and now he's just got his knight to a pretty good square, and it's still about equal here. Black castles, white plays bishop d3, and black plays bishop b7. And now white plays queen h5 with a pretty important threat here. If black plays a random move like a6, for example, then after knight takes f6, it's not actually the best move in this specific position, but this is just the general idea. And if you take back, then white will take, and it's pretty clear that he's going to be mating. Not after that move, after this move. So obviously black would not just do nothing. He tried to protect in his own way. The best move is to play bishop e5, and if white takes back, it's about equal still here. But he tried to play a creative move, queen to e7, and this move actually just loses, and it's actually mate in 7 for white here. Now the idea that black had intended here was after knight takes f6, g takes f6, he's discovered protecting this pawn, and it's equal here. But instead, white played a really nice move, which completely refutes black's idea. I'll give you a moment to find it. The move that white played here is queen takes h7. And now it's actually mate in 6 for white. So I'll just show you the line that happened. It was king takes h7, knight takes f6, king h6, once again only move, if you play instead of king h6, king h8, then knight g6 is mate in 1. King h6, knight e to g4, once again, only move. He played the move h4. There are 2 alternatives. The other one is f4, which will also lead to a quick mate. But he played the move h4. King f4 is played. g3, once again, only move for black. And here, white played the move bishop to e2, check. And this leads to mate in 3. But white can play a slightly cooler move here, which will lead to a faster mate. Let's see if you can find it. So there are actually 2 moves here which are mate in 2. One of them is to play castles, which is a very unusual move in this type of position, since normally when you're attacking you don't want to castle, but this actually leads to a pretty nice mate after this. And no matter what black plays actually, let's say he makes a queen move, knight h2 is mate after all the responses. And the other way to mate in 2 moves is to play king f1, which is the exact same purpose. Knight h2 will be mate no matter what. But Lasker continued playing with all checks. Bishop e2, king g2. Then he played rook h2, forcing the king to the back rank. And here he ended the game by playing king d2, which is mate in 1. And it's very rare that you get to checkmate with a king move. But another move you could play was just to castle queenside, which is also mate. The 6th game from these 12 is between Grandmaster Esteban Canal versus an unnamed player in a Simul. So Canal had white. He played e4 and his opponent played d5, so the Scandinavian defense. Takes, knight c3, queen a5. He played d4, c6, knight f3, bishop g4, bishop f4, e6. So all pretty much normal. He played h3, takes, bishop b4. White played bishop e2, and black played knight d7. Both sides are just continuing their development. And white played the move a3. And first of all, this is not actually a threat, because if black plays some random move, if you take, then you lose this rook. So black just ignored the threat for now. He played the move castles, which is a very natural move, but it actually leads to a completely lost position. And white played the move I just mentioned, actually. He played the move a takes b4. But can you see why? I'll give you a moment. So, of course, black, once black takes, then that's obviously the only good move. If he just moves his queen somewhere else, then there was pretty much no point in actually allowing this. So in the game, black did indeed take. White played king g2, which gives up another rook, actually. So in the game, black obviously took this. It doesn't really matter what he does, since you might have seen the threat by now, but if you did, you'll notice that all of these squares are actually covered. So the only move the queen can go without losing itself is to play queen b2, which will lead to the same fate as in the game, or to take on h1. He ended up taking on h1, and after the move, queen to take c6, this leads to a cool checkmate with two crossing bishops, essentially. After b takes c6, he played the move bishop a6, which is checkmate. So note how this bishop covers these squares, but this other bishop covers these squares. And this is a really nice pattern when it comes up in games, like it did here. The next game was played between Dimitrios Mastrovasilis, I'm not sure if I pronounced that right, against Nigel Short. So Mastrovasilis had white, and he played e4, c6, so the Caro-Kann defense, and they played the two knights variation. So these are all normal moves for both sides so far. h4, he wants to gain space on the king side, perhaps. Black played b5, trying to do the same thing on the queen side. They both continued, and he played knight e2. So e2 is a pretty flexible square for the knight. It can go to both sides from this position. Castles, this is not a good move from black. And the reason is just because it's sort of castling right into white's attack. And I don't know about you, but white's attack definitely looks more scary to me just because this rook, I feel like it can get into the attack more easily, like that. So white played move queen g3, just trying to continue attacking basically. Takes, king h8, and king h8 is kind of a slow move. Like, black should probably be trying to attack on the queen side if anything, but instead he's just trying to save himself on the king side. So now white plays h6, g6, and bishop f4. And this move is aiming for this diagonal potentially, or if he's intending to trade off for this bishop, just so black will have no control over all these weak dark squares. So black played queen e8, and white did what I mentioned, he played there. And f6, this is trying to just block off this diagonal. So white played the move knight d4, threatening this pawn, and black protected, of course. And here, white just decided to continue attacking by playing bishop c4. Bishop takes, rook takes, c5, attacking the rook. He plays rook to d2, and knight to b6. So now, if he takes this pawn, that's not good, because obviously that hangs the bishop. So he plays queen to b3, protecting this bishop and also sort of going on a battery against this piece. So he takes the bishop, trying to get rid of one of white's best pieces. White recaptures, and the move rook f to c8 is played. So this gets on the same line as the queen, and also now bishop takes c5 is sort of a bit riskier, although white ended up playing this in the game anyway, because now it's kind of hard to protect it as well. So black played the move knight g8 here, and what he wants to do is he wants to bring his queen over and take this bishop. But white played the move rook h to d1, and it may seem as though he's just ignoring black's threat, but actually white had a really nice response intended for the move queen c7. Black ended up playing the move queen c7, so can you find white's next move? Pause the video if you need more time. The move is to play bishop f8. And the reason this move works is it's all playing on the idea of this weak square on g7. So, of course, it looks like it hangs the queen, but if you take the queen, bishop g7 is mate in 1, which is a really cool mate, and it's actually how the game ended. Now, of course, if you take the bishop, then taking on c7 would win the queen, and it'll also probably be mate in a few moves because just of how active white's pieces are. So, the only other way that you can try to survive, really, I suppose, is to play knight h6. But at the very least, what you can do is you can just play queen c7, rook c7, bishop h6. And white's just winning here. This 8th game was played between two former world champions, Garry Kasparov and Viswanathan Anand. So Kasparov had white, and although this tactic that occurred in the game was pretty simple, if a world champion fell for it, I think it should be probably pretty useful to know. So it started off with knight f3, d5, c4, c6. So after d4 turns into the Slav defense. Knight f6, knight c3, takes a4. So all pretty much mainline stuff. Bishop f5, e3, e6, takes bishop b4. So all just normal moves. Castles, castles, queen e2, knight b to d7, knight e5. Getting the knight onto a pretty active square. Rook e8, rook d1, queen c7. Now he's double attacking this knight. So white takes on d7, takes f3. He might intend e4 now, trying to build up his center. And the move knight d5. And this move does not lose because if you play the move e4, which is not what happened in the game, then you can take on c3 with the bishop. And once you take back, if you take back that is, takes, you have to move the queen, takes here. And in this position, even though white's going to get this pawn back, this bishop and this rook haven't moved, and once he gets his rook here, these two rooks will be pretty active. So the position is still equal, even though white has two bishops for a rook. But that did not happen in the game. Instead of playing e4, he played the move knight a2, sorry. And he wants to take this bishop, probably soon. So black played bishop f8, just getting it out of harm's way. e4 is played now. And the reason this move still doesn't technically win anything is because after bishop g6 takes, you can take back this way. And once the queen moves, you'll get your piece back. So Kasparov still didn't take, and instead he played the move Queen E1, which it has these two nice diagonals to go on, and E1 is generally a useful square for the queen, that is, if nothing else is occupying it, just because it can go on both sides of the board pretty easily. So this move also actually sets a really nice trap, which Anand fell for. He played the move F5, just trying to attack in the center, and if white didn't have his next move, this would be a pretty good move, but white has kind of a tactic here, actually. The hard part is seeing why it's a tactic, actually. He plays the move E takes D5, like I said earlier. And you might think, well, once black takes back, isn't he just going to win the bishop anyway? But no, that's actually not the case. Once this move is played, white plays the move bishop E2. And note that when the queen was on E2, in this position, the E2 square was occupied, so the bishop couldn't be saved. But once you get to this position, after this move, the E2 squared is not occupied. So if the game had continued, black actually resigned after E takes D5, Queen E7, Rook D2, and now white can just maneuver around his pieces, say Queen to D1, Bishop to F1, and he'll be up a piece and winning. So this ninth game was played between Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, a world-class GM right now, against Claude Landenberg, who was in the 2400s. So Vachier-Lagrave had white, and he played E4, E5, Knight F3, Knight C6, Bishop B5, Knight G to E7. So this is not a very common move, but it's not necessarily bad. So castles there, D4 takes, Bishop D7, Knight C3, and black's position is slightly passive in this position. So he took on D4, he's trying to trade off pieces, which is generally a good thing in these types of positions. If you're as a rule of thumb, if you're cramped, it's better to trade off pieces, and black is definitely a bit cramped. So takes, Queen D4. Knight C6 is played, he's attacking the queen. Queen D3, Bishop E7. Queen to G3. He's attacking this pawn, and black, sensing danger on the king side, instead chose to castle queen side. And white played Bishop E3 here, continuing his development. And in general, you should avoid taking the pawns in front of your king, even if they're the opposing player's pawns. And that's just because it can lead to an attack, potentially on the king side. So white played the move Bishop E3, just continuing his development. G6 is played, protecting the pawn just in case for the future. Knight D5 is played, and F5. So now white is better here now, because F5 is a bit of a weakening move. And he plays B4. And after black plays the move Rook D to E8, which doesn't do too much, he plays the move B5. And now he's attacking this knight, which is an important defender of the queen side. So after knight E5, white took on A7. And this is not the best move, but white is still better here for sure. So black took on B5. White played Bishop D4 now, pinning this knight to the rook. And Queen C4 is played, just attacking the bishop. So now Rook F to D1. So white is still much better here, but black's next move, F takes E4, allows for a really nice tactic. And it's a combination, and it's not very easy to see, especially from afar. So pause the video if you'd like to find out. I'm going to show the tactic. The move is Bishop takes E5, which doesn't seem like all that special of a move really at first, but once you get further into the tactic, you'll see why. So the reason this move is a bit surprising is just because generally it's not good to trade a bishop for a knight. But since white has a tactic, obviously it's a pretty important exception. So it takes back, and knight takes e7. And here black resigned, seeing the tactic. But I'll continue playing through it just in case you want to see it, that is. After the move rook takes e7, queen a3 is a fork. And it threatens this rook, but also threatens checkmate in the corner. And that's what Claude Landenberg didn't see at first. So, of course, if you move the rook, that's checkmate. And if you stop mate, then you lose the rook. So that's tactic number 9. This 10th tactic came from a game between Siegbert Tarrasch, who was a grandmaster in the early 1900s, against a group of players who were allowed to talk about the position with one another. So Tarrasch started with the move f4 and d5, so bird's opening. And he continued with knight f3, c5, e3, knight c6. So this looks sort of like a reverse Dutch at this point. Bishop b5, bishop d7, castles e6, b3, queen c7, bishop b2, f6. So he's trying to blunt this bishop's diagonal and also play for e5. He plays the move c4 now, just countering the center really. And after knight c to e7, this is not a very good move, just because it's moving the same piece twice and also taking up a square where the previous knight might have gone. So after this move, white played knight to c3, and intending that after takes, of course he'll take back probably with the knight. So black played knight h6, and this just proves that knight c to e7 was not good, because the knight would have gone to e7 most likely originally, but obviously it can't now. So white plays the move rook to c1, getting on the same line as the queen. And after bishop takes, knight takes, black realized that and played queen to d7. Now after move queen to e2, getting the queen out, black plays knight back to c6, even after moving it back to e7 in the first place. Takes e4, just opening up the center, since black is not castled yet. And black castled queenside. And at first, this looks like, and I even thought that this was probably a pretty bad move. But now thinking about the position, I realized that black doesn't really have much choice. And the reason is just because the center is opening up, so obviously black wants to get out of the center. But the only way he can do that in a timely manner is to play castles queenside. So that's what he did. Now white played e5 now, and the move that was played here was a6, attacking the knight. And after knight c3, b5 is played. And this move just looks a bit risky aesthetically because he's opening up the center and moving, well, not the center, but he's opening up the side where his king is castled by moving the pawns there. So white played a4 here, trying to take advantage of black's inaccuracies. And after the move b4, of course, it may seem as though this pawn is hanging, and that is true. But Tarrasch didn't want to go through this because the queens would get traded, and he felt like his chances lied more if the queens didn't get traded. So after the move b4, he played knight d1. He just wanted to continue the attack, and this move is still good. White is still definitely better. So he played king to b7, protecting the pawn. E takes f6, g takes f6, rook f6, bishop f6, sorry. And black played rook e8, which attacks the queen, and therefore he's not going to lose a rook. Okay, well, no, sorry, that was not the correct line. So white played knight e3, and the move d4 is bad because the rook is still hanging. So instead, before doing that, black played the move rook to g8, and the move continued, and the game continued like this. Queen d3, knight g4, knight takes, queen takes, rook f2, protecting mate. Queen d7, knight e5, knight takes, bishop takes, rook c8. And although not much has happened over the last 10 moves or so, white still has a pretty solid advantage. So he plays the move queen f3 now, which threatens this pawn even though it's protected and sets up a pin. Black plays king b6, he wants to get out of the pin. And after the move d3, perhaps he wants to get his rook over like this. This is probably the most efficient way of doing so. The move bishop h6 is played, getting the bishop developed. Rook f to c2, d4. And white plays a really nice move here. This is not the final tactic, but it still is a good move. And the move is a5. And this is sort of trying to flush the king out. So, of course, if black takes, this is actually the best move. Rook takes, rook takes, rook takes. And after a move like king to b6, white will play rook to d5, and all of his pieces are aiming at the king, and he's completely winning in this position. So black probably saw this, so instead he played the move king to b5, which hold on to this pawn for now. And now white played one of the best moves out of all of these tactics, actually. So I'll give you a moment to see if you can find it. Pause the video if you need more time. I'm going to show the move now. The move is bishop to c7. And it's actually mate in 4, surprisingly. So the reason that this move wins is because, first of all, it's threatening the move queen to b7. So if black does nothing, then queen to b7 is mate in 1. And coincidentally, rook takes c5 is also mate in 1. So he has 2 threats. So if black plays the move rook takes c7, then you can play queen b7, which is a really cool way of mating, because after rook takes, then rook c5 is checkmate. So if you don't play rook to c7, and instead you play queen takes c7, then you can do the same mate, basically, except just in the opposite order. Play rook takes c5 first, queen takes, and then queen b7. So if you block with the queen, here is mate. And if you take over here, then this is mate. So anyway, that's all for this tactic. On to number 11. So I decided to feature 2 Carlsen tactics to end the dozen. And this first one is actually played in a blindfold game, which makes it even more impressive, against Sergei Caro-Kann. So it started off in the Sicilian. Nothing too interesting so far. F4 takes castles, knight g6, queen h5, d6. And both sides are making some mistakes, but it was a blindfolded game, so I think they can be excused for that. So bishop takes f4, knight takes f4, rook f4, and g6. So now, obviously, it's not a threat to take there anymore. So white played the move queen f3, bishop g7. And it may look as though he's going to lose a piece here, because after rook f7, if the queen moves, then this will happen. But black has the move bishop d4. And although it may not look like it, the position is actually about equal here. So he played king to h1, queen d8, and it may seem as though white must be winning here, obviously, because he's got this monster attack, and he's got a really active knight. But black is actually equal here because he's got all of these threats. And even though his king isn't safe, the rest of his threats make up for that. So white played c3. So if you take, then takes back. But black played bishop e5, saving his piece for now. And rook g7 is played. And the idea is that this move is threatening checkmate in 1. So if you take or do pretty much anything that doesn't protect against this threat, queen f7 wins. So after the move rook g7, queen f6 was played. And this is offering a queen trade. And although Caro-Kann probably had calculated ahead at this point, after queen takes f6, bishop f6, rook h7, you might think that white has gotten a pawn, and so he shouldn't be too much worse. And in fact, if black didn't have his next tactic, the position would be just equal. But see if you can find this move. It's really cool. I'll give you a few seconds. The move is castles, and how often is castles the only winning move, really? And that's part of the reason I like this tactic so much, but I'll just show some of the lines that could occur. Of course, if you move the knight, then this rook will hang, and vice versa, if you move the rook, the knight will hang. And that's just what makes this tactic really cool, because these two are just sort of dependent on one another, and so you can't really do anything. So what happened in the game was knight a3, just giving away this knight, and once the rook moves, it went to c7. Then the rest of the game just continued like this. I won't bother talking about it, since it's not too difficult. And pretty good technique from Carlsen at the end. Of course, you can't take the bishop because of checkmate. So that was this tactic, and the final tactic out of these 12 was actually played by Carlsen when he was only 12 years old, and he was a 2100 player at the time. But this tactic is actually very difficult to find in a real game. I know I keep saying that, but it's true. And I just thought it was a useful tactic to show, regardless of his rating at the time. So Carlsen had white. It went in the French defense like this. So this is the Tarrasch variation of the French, named after one of the players from an earlier game. So Carlsen is going to sacrifice a pawn in exchange for a better development. And that's how the game proceeded. Knight f3. So Carlsen is down a pawn, but he's got pretty good pieces here, and his king's already safe. So the position is even. So queen b6. He plays queen a4, getting his queen out. Queen b4. This move offers to trade. And in general, just as another rule of thumb, you should only trade if you're ahead in material or if you have pretty much a space disadvantage. So obviously Carlsen is behind in material, and it looks like he probably does have more space. since he's got this active pawn right here. So he plays the move queen to c2, just getting out of line of the threat. Black continues insisting on the trade, but white escapes yet again. Then black continues developing. Bishop e3, queen a5, bishop g5. This time Carlsen's offering to trade. And I said it was an exception, and the exception is still true. But in this case, it's not a good idea to trade. And that's just because, in general, it's just a bad idea to trade, as I mentioned earlier. So what his opponent should do is he should just take. And after takes, he should play something like h6. And once the knight comes back, then he's traded off a set of pieces. In this position, I'd say this bishop is definitely better than this one. So this is not a good move. But instead, his opponent played queen to d8. So what white did in the game, he should play something like bishop e7 now. But he played the move queen e3. And after takes, he, of course, would not take back with the queen, since he does not want to trade queens. He instead took with the knight. So now black played the move queen e7, and white played rook a to c1, a natural move. And here he creates a threat that black completely missed. Black played what's probably the most natural move, but it's also a really bad move in this position. That move that he played is h6, and in a blitz game, probably most people would play this as well. And just the reason for this is because it's a very natural move, and generally you're not going to look for tactics in the opening. But what Carlsen did is he played a really nice move, and it's also very hard to find actually, even though the tactic is quite simple. You guys should try to look for it for a moment. Alright, the move is queen takes a7. So, as I said before, this move is very hard to find. And that's just because it doesn't look like there's going to be any tactic in this type of position, but there just happens to be one. So if black takes, then after the move rook c8, queen d8, only legal move, takes, knight f7, white's going to win the rook next move and be up a piece. So in the game, Carlsen's opponent realized that. He played rook b8, but he's still losing after queen takes, knight takes, and rook c8. So after king to d7, rook takes h8. Now, you can't really take here. I mean, technically you can, but after rook takes b8, Carlsen would have 2 rooks and a bishop for a queen, which is an overwhelming material advantage. So I'll just show how the game went on. His opponent played knight to c6, knight f3, f6, and white went on to win the game like this. And here he was forced to do this pretty much because otherwise he's going to get mated here. So after takes here, black resigned and Carlsen won the game. So anyway, those are my 12 tactics from real games. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.